I do want to start with Kyrie Irving. If you missed it last night, I don't know how it happened, but the Brooklyn Nets gave up 147 points to a lackluster, young, not ready to win Cleveland Cavalier team. Well, maybe they are, and maybe JB Bickerstaff has done something special in Cleveland because they smoke the Nets in double overtime. And, Jake, I think we've talked a lot about this on the show, and that is that there is a significant, I think, bit of evidence that says the Brooklyn Nets are better off if they end up trading Kyrie Irving. Because it was very apparent last night the guy who suffered from Kyrie Irving's return was James Harden.
Wait, no. Guys who suffered. Multiple guys suffered last night.
Yeah.
Yes, James Harden, Joe Harris, Jeff Green, multiple people on that team are suffering because Kyrie took, 28 shots last night or whatever it was?
Yeah.
In his return. And I really think, this isn't a conversation about just like, hey, is Kyrie Irving a good player or is he just sort of like, is he a franchise player or that's not the conversation we're having here. The conversation we're simply having here is can Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving play on the same team, make it seamless, make it a championship caliber team? And is it better if Kevin Durant and James Harden simply play together and have great role players like Joe Harris and Jeff Green and, DeAndre Jordan in the middle? Like, is that setup better than a big three? And in my opinion, it is better. I look at what James Harden did last night. What was he like? I think he was like 30-ish and like 12 assists or something like that in a game when he didn't take a shot in the first half, legitimately. No shots for James Harden in the first half because Kyrie was shooting the ball so much and missing. That's why they were behind in this game. And so, for me, it is easy to say, hey, like, after what we saw with Harden and KD before Kyrie came back, I really like that product. I like what they had going.
A lot.
I thought they had momentum. I thought Joe Harris was shooting the lights out, like Jeff Green was playing well. And then you bring Kyrie back into the situation, and there was always going to be some rust. There was always going to be some things you had to work through with all three of them on the floor. But I didn't think it would be that bad. Like, I thought it would be, hey, the conversation would have been like, hey, like, we need to get Harden a little more looks, or we need to get KD a little more looks. But last night was just straight up, hey, I'm Kyrie, I'm going to shoot the ball a lot, and that's it.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where you have to figure out how it is that, if you are the Nets and you have a guy in James Harden, how is he playing 51 minutes and only scoring 21 points? That's a huge problem. How is Kyrie Irving in his return? And I think it's incumbent on Kyrie, and Jake, I don't know what you think about this, but I think it's incumbent on Kyrie to integrate himself into what had been a pretty smooth, free-flowing team. How is Kyrie Irving playing 48 minutes, taking 28 shots, which is exactly double what Harden took, scoring 37 points, 3 assists, 2 rebounds. Like, Kyrie Irving scored a lot, he shot a lot, but I think the worst thing we saw last night was on that shot where Sexton sent the game in overtime. That was terrible defense by Kyrie.
Yeah, and as far as Kyrie being, as far as it being on Kyrie to like kind of ingratiate himself back into this flow, I can tell you right now that's not how Kyrie views it. Kyrie views it as, hey, this is my team, and these guys are playing with me, and that's the biggest problem. And so I really struggle with the idea that Kyrie should continue to be on this team. Like, I just think that this setup, dictates that it's Harden and Kevin Durant. And when I look at the classic big threes we've had in the league, like, look at what LeBron and D-Wade were in Miami. They were essentially a big two with Chris Bosh kind of playing, the background guy. They sold it as a big three, but that's essentially what it turned into. And so when I look at that team versus the Nets, I say to myself, well, you essentially have the same thing in you have the same setup in Durant and Harden, And then you throw Kyrie into this mix, and the only difference is Kyrie thinks he's like the Jesus Christ of point guards, and so he's got to constantly have the ball and shoot.
Are you saying he's not the Jesus Christ?
No, I'm saying he's a losing player. That's what I'm saying right now.
I thought Kyrie was God. Like, just ask him. The earth is flat. He knows it because he created it.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is, if you listen to what Kyrie says. He's never wrong. He doesn't take blame. And he's a guy like he straight up said, I'm not accountable to the media. I'm not going to meet with the media all year. The NBA said, yes, you are. We're going to fine you because every player has a clause in his contract that says you got to meet certain media obligations. So he sits up there and he just, literally the other day, he leaned over and had his hands on his chin on his hands and refused to really answer any questions. Mm-hmm. And it's like every guy who's like this is just a pain in the ass.
Yep.
The worst thing that happened to Kyrie Irving was he won a championship in Cleveland.
Yep.
Because since Kyrie became an NBA champion, it has been straight downhill for him. Attitude-wise, desire-wise, fire-wise, play-wise, injury-wise, Boston was an abject failure for Kyrie Irving. So now here's my question. Let's say you do trade Kyrie.
Yeah.
You're probably looking for significant bench scoring in return for him. But you would take draft picks and balance that salary cap out best you can. Are the Brooklyn Nets without Kyrie Irving as good as the Lakers are? I think they're better than the Bucks.
Yeah, they're definitely better than the Bucks.
They're the best team in the East.
Yeah, to me, the Brooklyn Nets with KD and Harden at full strength, full chemistry level, all of that, having played 30, 40, 50 games together in that setup, they're going to be, in my opinion, right there with the Lakers. I think the biggest difference is that when you get into the postseason and you're playing a LeBron James-led team, that team is going to simply adapt to whatever your weaknesses are. So, Harden and KD can play the best basketball possible, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to just simply who makes more plays in any given series, unfortunately. So, I can't say that they'd be better than the Lakers, but I think they'd give them 7 games, that's for sure. And I think KD I guess the question would be, would Harden show up? Because that's really the downfall of James Harden. He hasn't shown up in the postseason.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting question. Like he was 0 for 28 from 3 at one point, and the Rockets missed 44 straight three-pointers.
And that's how the Warriors beat them.
That's how the Warriors advanced, right? And Kevin Durant comes down and hits that shot, and everybody's hunky-dory, right? And my question is, does that carry over, or are the Brooklyn Nets just a much better team than any Rocket team that James Harden was part of? Which is what I think, because I'm a guy who believes in James Harden when he's not your number one option. Mm-hmm. This is the Russell Westbrook conversation.
Sure.
When you have 2 number one options, you have no number one options, right? When we saw this first week with the Nets, when it was just James Harden and KD and Joe Harris, everybody understood their role. Everybody understood that Kevin Durant was the number one. Everybody understood that when Durant was off, it was James Harden. And everybody understood you got to do whatever you can do to draw guys and then kick it out to Joe Harris, who is hitting 50% of his three-pointers.
A ridiculous number.
You're hitting 50% of your three-pointers, yet you are still taking the ball out of his hands so that Kyrie Irving can be placated.
And then so much to that end that he's forced to come down and rebound because he doesn't have a purpose on the floor. You're talking about one of the best shooters in the league having to be under the basket battling, what was Jared Allen last night, oddly enough. And so it's just, to me, it's frustrating because we know what this team could be. We know that Point Harden, as they're referring to him as, is really good. When they roll out to start games, James Harden is not looking to score. He's looking to get points on the board with the team.
Yeah.
And when you do that, when you get guys like Kevin Durant going early in the game, when you get Joe Harris knocking down 2 or 3 threes in the first quarter, you're setting your team up for success. And James Harden is humbled enough by this trade, and he's so over the moon about being with the Nets and being on a championship caliber team that he's willing to play point guard, that he's willing to do that. I mean, there were interviews literally this past week before Kyrie came back where James Harden said, hey, I'm playing point guard on this team, and I haven't had to play that role in a little while, so I got to get better at not turning the damn ball over. And we would win more comfortably if I didn't turn the ball over so much. He straight up said that in a post-game interview.
Yeah.
And so my point here is it speaks to his mindset and where he's at with the game. And so then you bring Kyrie back in the equation, and it's like, oh, well, here we go. We got to restart. We got to figure out, what is Harden going to play the wing, and then Durant's going to play the 4 or the 5, and Kyrie's going to have the ball. It messes the whole thing up.
Yeah, it does. And I think the hard part for me mainly is that this Eastern Conference blows. And when you're watching a team like Brooklyn, and I understand that Steve Nash has not had these three together, and this is not the Nets rotation that we're going to see. It's not. I think things are going to change. I do think they're going to trade Kyrie Irving. There's a lot of buzz around the NBA with that. I do think, and if they don't trade him, they are going to do their level best to trade him. Mm-hmm. Because, and I not to belabor this point on the Nets at all, but I think Joe Harris is a star. I think Joe Harris is a guy who, he's a three-point champion. He was finally getting his run, and he was cashing on that.
Yeah.
And I know that we've argued over LaMelo Ball starting, not starting.
Sure.
Joe Harris should be starting for the Nets.
Well, and the thing is, the story with Joe Harris is that, this season, this year is going to be his second year straight starting for the Nets. 2 years ago, he was a bench player, and he earned his way into the starting lineup before, when Kyrie was in Boston, Joe Harris had earned his way into the starting rotation. So Kyrie comes to the team, Joe Harris is still starting, but now we have this weird dynamic, with the three of them right now. And so you're right. Joe Harris is absolutely the victim in this situation because Kyrie Irving's going to, handle the ball and do all the crazy moves and get to the basket and get his, but it's in a losing effort, and that's my problem with Kyrie Irving. The only reason he's a champion is because he played with LeBron James. LeBron James carried them to the finals. Kyrie hit a big shot, and now he's known as a champion, and that essentially made his career. And so now I look at him as a player, and I agree with you. He's a bit selfish, or quite a bit selfish, really. And he's not a winning mentality. I can say now that James Harden is at least a winning mentality. He's like, hey, my team needs me to play point guard. My team needs me to draw two defenders and kick to Joe Harris. My team needs me to feed KD. I'm going to do these things because I want to win a championship.
Well, I think it's fascinating, and I for one, will look forward to Kyrie not being on that team. And I know that sounds like I'm a hater, but listen, growing up in Chicago, watching all of the malcontents, like Horace Grant and Scottie Pippen, watching, having been there every single day covering the Lakers when Shaq and Kobe were at each other's throat and Kobe was in Sacramento refusing to shoot a basketball during a game. Like, I've seen this movie before. And trust me, the ending never changes. Somebody's got to go. Whether it was Shaq in LA or it's going to be Kyrie in Brooklyn, somebody's got to go. And my feeling is they'll be better off when it's Kyrie Irving wearing a different uniform. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Find us on the good old YouTube machine, The Monty Show, Monty, The Monty Show. More questions about how long we're going to be on Periscope? Not for long. Like, I feel like, we can keep being on Periscope.
Yeah.
Up until March 31st. I don't know. We'll see. We really want a transition to YouTube because that's where we're going to be long term.
Yep.
So what I would encourage you to do is stop watching on Periscope. God love you, Twitter. Jack, please don't block me. And start watching on YouTube because that's going to be our long-term live streaming video home.